Chapter 11, Part 2. During her 5-year tenure of the Renaissance, Bernhardt put on 9 productions, 3 of them hits, others either revivals or catastrophes. She opened with Le Roi by Jules Lemaitre, a well-written play which for some reason did not take with the public. It is rumored that she and Lemaitre were lovers for a time. If this is true, their affair must have been a gentle one, based more on friendship than any more tempestuous emotion. Lemaitre was a sweetly modest intellectual, a man of innate, genuine goodness, and one person with whom Bernhardt could never possibly have quarreled. Each felt for the other tenderness and profound respect. Lemaitre admired her not only as an artist of genius, but as a woman of genius. Nothing escapes her, he wrote. She requires only a few minutes of attention to be up on the most abstruse subject. With an astonishing mind and clairvoyance, she would have succeeded in any other art, in science or politics. Lemaitre wound up one letter and Les Contemporains with, "Perhaps you have not been one of the most reasonable women of this century, but you will have lived more than multitudes of others, and you will have been one of the most gracious of apparitions that ever soared for the consolation of man across the changing face of this world of phenomena." Whew, right? Yeah, sorry. To help make up the losses of the brief run of Leroy, as though she had not already set herself a severe enough schedule, Bernhardt played extra matinees of the drama that took the greatest toll of her strength, Phaedra. Of her performances, Sarcey wrote, "It's strange, stupefying, inexplicable, but it's none the less undeniable that Madame Sarah Bernhardt is younger and more beautiful than she has ever been. Her Phaedra is the epitome of art. Such an interpretation is almost a miracle." Every time she recreated this most difficult of all tragedian roles, the miracle was to recur. Sarah Bernhardt's Phaedra was to become a national institution. After attending a much later revival, Reynaldo Hahn wrote, "Phaedra, interpreted by Sarah, will always remain one of the most perfect things given to our sight or hearing on earth." Sudermann's Magda enjoyed only a moderate success, although she enjoyed playing it and included it in her touring repertoire. That rigorous critic Bernard Shaw saw it as late as 1895 and couldn't take her performance seriously. But the incredibility is pardonable, he wrote. One feels when the heroine bursts on the scene a dazzling vision of beauty that instead of imposing on you, she adds to her own piquancy by looking you straight in the face and saying, in effect, "Now who would ever suppose that I am a grandmother?" That, of course, is irresistible, and one is not sorry to have been coaxed to relax one's notions of the dignity of art when she gets to serious business and shows how ably she does her work. The coaxing suits well with the childishly egotistical character of her acting, which is not the art of making you think more highly or feel more deeply, but the art of making you admire her, champion her, weep with her, laugh at her jokes, follow her fortunes breathlessly, and applaud her wildly when the curtain falls. Shaw was later to recall of that Magda how capitally, vulgarly Sarah did that. The big success of 1898 was Lorenzaccio, Alfred de Musset's poetic and to modern ears interminable drama of intrigue, vengeance, assassination, and further pastimes of Renaissance Italy. Written in 1834, it had never been presented on any stage. Bernhardt gave it a lavish production and played the title role of the Florentine youth with taste and poetic emphasis. The masculine characters she chose to play were never ones which required over-masculinity. Her male impersonations had the sexless grace of the voices of choir boys, or the not quite real pathos of Poirot, Pierrot, Pierrot. Jules de Tillet, an exacting critic whom up until this time Bernhardt had always disturbed rather than charmed, now admitted, "She has reached the sublime. I have never seen anything on the stage equal to what she has done in Lorenzaccio." In her next success, she was back to all femininity. This was Gismonda, a fifth opus hand-tailored by Sardou. Gismonda had a good run, although certain of Sarah's public felt definitely let down because at the finale, instead of going into the customary death throes, she married and lived happily ever afterward with Lucien Guitry. That fine actor was her greatest leading man. Coqueline, with whom she also played, was in the position of a co-star rather than leading man. Guitry had returned after 9 years in the theater at St. Petersburg to burst like a joyous discovery upon his native public. A titan of a man, overwhelmingly attractive, expansive, and vigorous when he said bonjour. It was in the manner of giving one the day itself. Good day. Yeah, nice. Guitry was a man of profound humanity. Jules Renard notes in his journal, "What a pleasure it is to place one's hand in this big one." According to his son Sasha, Guitry seized upon life and embellished it. His manner of acting was one of naturalness and a powerful simplicity that came as a startling innovation to a period of artificiality and superfluous gesture. His magnetism was phenomenal, and when he walked onto a stage, one was struck by a presence, as when Chalepine made one of his astonishing entrances. Even during scenes of intense emotion, he hardly moved, conceding to gesture only when it was inevitable. He'd study a part while going about routine activity. "This morning at breakfast," he told a friend, "I worked out the big finale of the second act, and all the time I was eating an egg. You see, gestures are superfluous." This magnificent actor was all masculinity. Henri Bataille said of him, "Guitry is the first real man who has trodden the stage." Sarah Bernhardt's friendship with Guitry and eventually with his family was to be a warm and long-standing one. In 1882, when the actor married Mademoiselle Ponchest in London, Bernhardt stood in as witness. 35 years later, she was again to serve as witness at the wedding of Sasha and Yvonne Printemps. Guitry fairly worshipped Madame Sarah, and it was he who said that the title should be written Madame Sarah, as she was Notre Dame du Theatre, Madame Sarah. Shortly after the First World War, the two were asked to play a short scene in a charity benefit. They met to read through the script. By then, Bernhardt was old and minus a leg. Her face was haggard and her hands like ancient claws, but her voice was still the voix d'or, and she still glowed with that unique incandescence. I have to find it. Incandescence when she spoke a line. She read through her first long speech, at the end of which Guitry was supposed to come in with a reply. No sound was heard from him. Bernhardt paused, then looked up. Guitry was dissolved in tears. The antithesis of Lucien Guitry was Edouard de Max, Bernhardt's leading man for some 20 productions. He was a good actor. Some critics considered him on a par with Monet Sully, but he was prone to declaiming in a voice that was totally magnificent but had a pronounced Romanian accent, and he never stopped posturing. In appearance, he was a mixture of Persian prince, boulevard dandy, and gypsy. He was like something out of Baudelaire. His face, which was hauntingly pallid, had the tormented expression of the true tragedian. There was a sort of exotic allure about the man. His fingers were covered with oriental rings, and his handkerchief always reeked of exotic perfume. There was something rather satanic about him, a quality he emphasized in roles such as Nero. The actor was a combination of the superb and the ridiculous. A notorious homosexual, he became known as Le Monsieur aux Camélias, and Jean Cocteau summed him up as a prince of comme il ne faut pas. Ne fait pas. Ne faut pas. Okay. There are many stories about his offstage behavior, and rather bizarre they are. He is said to have held levees at which he granted certain of his young men the honor of watching him lolling in the rose-strewn water of his immense Roman bath. That he kept a bronze bowl filled with coins with which, at the height of a bacchanalia, he'd shower his stark naked guests, and further pastimes of a similar nature. In his fashion, he was devoted to Madame Sarah, and she in turn liked and admired him. There was a curious camaraderie between the two. De Max was the victim of periodic sulking moods, and when he was in one of them, he would address her as the widow Damala, which infuriated yet amused her. He was fond of playing somewhat satanic pranks on her. Now, I want to note, satanic is lowercase in this. Somewhat satanic pranks on her, as when he blackened his teeth before a final scene and persuaded two other players to do the same. During a moment when their backs to the audience, they faced the star, they grinned in unison, and Sarah exploded with maniacal laughter as fortuitously the curtain fell. That would be hilarious. The most famous actor to play at the Renaissance was Constant Coquelin, perhaps the greatest comedian France ever produced. He had also made a break with the Comédie Française. Coquelin and Bernhardt were to star together in a number of subsequent tours, but during this first season, he was merely presented playing his famously funny roles in a series of Molière matinees in which Bernhardt did not appear. The Italian writer D'Annunzio, then in the first flush of success and chronic height of his egotism, came to Paris to discuss with Bernhardt a production of his Dead City. His long liaison with Eleanor Duse was already well established, and he brought his exquisite mistress with him. When D'Annunzio called upon Madame Sarah and saw her for the first time, he exclaimed, "She's magnificent," then added modestly, "She's D'Annunzione." Bernhardt was playing special matinees of La Dame at the time, and D'Annunzio conceived the curious and possibly diabolical notion of putting on some performances of the same play in Italian, starring Duse. Duse's acting was striking for its poetic simplicity and naturalness. Her Marguerite lacked the brilliant showmanship of the French tragedians, and her performance received no acclaim. D'Annunzio was incensed, not with the Paris public, but with his lovely mistress. He turned upon her viciously, telling her she'd been a fool to let herself be trapped into such asinine competition, and reducing her to one of the shattered states of despair she suffered so frequently throughout their tempestuous years together.